Hi, good morning. It is Wednesday morning, early at about 8 a.m. And I'm very glad to be out here early. It's been a very busy week working, and I think yesterday I worked about 12 hours trying to get something done by next week. There's a sort of a deadline, and it's been pretty strenuous and stressful and has kept me inside. I don't even think I wasn't able to go out at all yesterday for a walk, which just about destroys me on days like that. So, and the previous day only about, 30 minutes. Didn't have time to record anything. Just got out before sunset. So today I'm coming out here before I get started on work because I know it's going to be another busy day. And I want to make sure I come out. So I'm not taking any chances. Sometimes once I get into work, I get really preoccupied and like all distractions go away and I just kind of become hyper-focused on the problem that I'm solving, and hours can go by, and if I could just add up the number of hours of my life that I've spent like that in sort of a daze, it's like a trance almost. I can solve problems. My brain can get very focused, and I've solved a lot of interesting problems over my lifetime for work in that sort of mode. But it's like, sort of, you just feel your life just sort of like wasting away in that state. I hardly feel aware. Not like this. Not like when I'm out walking and I feel alive, in that working state. It's like you're like a machine. And I can feel the brain operating just like a machine, just going through the motions, doing whatever it has to do, but it's just a very mechanical process. And I am using AI to help me with writing this bulletin that I'm writing. And it's also going through a very mechanical process, and it's interesting to just watch how it works. It's very useful. There's no way I can deny the usefulness of AI, and Claude in particular, which is what I'm using. It would have taken me just 10 times as long, if not longer, to do what I'm doing now without it. It works so fast. I mean, it's actually pretty amazing. It's undeniably useful. There's all sorts of problems with AI that we have to figure out and solve, but there's no denying that it's not going away anytime soon. Like, this is here to stay, simply because it's so useful. I mean, there's problems we can solve using AI much faster than we could before, but I think it's like everything. How is it being used? Is it being used, like I'm using it for scientific research to improve the safety of pressurized equipment in companies, that can fail. And I'm using it to sort of improve the models of predicting failure for these equipments based on test data, tests that people have run, and coming up with predictive models, better improved predictive models than what the industry has now. So this can actually help the entire industry stay safer once I'm done with this work and it gets incorporated into the industry codes, the safety codes and practices, which is the intention. That's actually the deadline. We have to have it done by a certain day so it can do that. So this is likely going to save lives, save people money, allow people to operate more efficiently, know when to replace equipment. I mean, these are important things in our industrial society, where things can fail, things can explode, people can die, there can be massive loss of life and equipment and all that sort of thing. And that's my work, essentially, is focused on those things. So I always like to think that I'm helping, well, not only think, I am helping to make things more safe. I may not be solving the big problems, but I am solving some problems. And, that requires my brain to work a certain way. And it has skills that have allowed me to work in this way. But those skills are, I would say, supplemented by AI because of its speed. It's like having a personal assistant, that's helping you write. So I ask it to do things, it does it. It's amazingly intelligent in that sense, in that it understands what I'm saying, what I'm telling it to do. I mean, it's getting better over time. It's really kind of remarkable. And when I think of how I used to do this manually, it would just take me months to do what now can be done in days. And it's not replacing, because like what it did on its own to begin with was not satisfactory, and it's taken me months to work through it step by step, going through improving parts of it, having it redo things, collecting more data. So, it is very much like an assistant, because in the way that an assistant really doesn't operate on their own, you could have this, and maybe eventually it will be able to operate on its own in some agentic fashion. But right now, the way I'm using it, it's definitely more of an assistant. It requires me to be there sort of helping it along, to do the right thing, to make sure we have data presented in the right way, interrogating it, asking questions, having it check things. It's just, there's a lot to it. And I am learning it. It's a new skill to learn how to use AI, a skill I only just started this year in this way, using generative AI. Claude in particular is what I've used the most of. So it's how this is going to affect humanity and us going forward, it's not clear, just like all technology. I think we know it's going to be used for good purposes. It's going to be used for very evil purposes, like everything else that's ever been invented by humans. I'd like to think that I'm using it for good purposes, but I guess it's hard to say. It's hard to say, but this is my work, this is my job. It keeps me occupied. But what I enjoy most is coming outside, going for a walk in nature like this, watching summer come to a close, I can feel summer fading, like it's still here. The days are cooler, it's more quiet, calm, like even this morning, like it just feels like the energy level is going down. It's like as the temperature goes down, temperature is a measure of energy, internal kinetic energy specifically, and I can feel it going down. As the temperatures drop, it just gets more quiet. Still though, bustling with life. I mean, you can hear it, I'm sure now, the insects still, the birds, even the quiet, like you can just almost hear it, it's palpable. So yeah, I'm here to make sure I don't miss this day, like I feel like I missed the past 2 days. And I hope to get out more. I'm going to try to accomplish what I need to accomplish, my objectives, and then come back out later tonight after working. But I'm just happy to be here now. So yeah, it's just a wonderful day to be outside. It's like I said, cooler, but I kind of like it. There's like a, heat can be intense. There's an intensity to heat. You don't feel that intensity right now. You feel more, it's a calmer energy, but still, like I said, bustling with life. I mean, I'm watching the bees hop from flower to flower. Yeah, so nice. I mean, just a nice day to be alive. And walking around, doing like what humans have done for millions of years, walk. Which is, it's interesting, I've gone into this before, but how how primitive walking is. And I think it's, I mean, in the sense that it's been happening for, I mean, humans have been walking upright for what, like 2 million years probably, in one way or another. Our ancestors. And maybe that's why it's something that we all return to. I mean, not to mention it's just who we are. I mean, we are walking creatures, right? That's what we do. I don't think most people think of it in terms of connecting with our ancestors, but I do. You know, I think of these most primitive things that we do versus the most advanced things, if you want to use the word advanced, like AI, right? On the other hand, if you want to say the pinnacle of our technological achievements, you know, certainly not the pinnacle of intelligence. We've gone into that. That's a whole different matter. But when it comes to technology, there's no denying that it has advanced so much from the primitive tool making. When you think about it, right, 2 million years ago, we were creating stone tools and you know, just surviving by scavenging, hunting and gathering, that sort of thing. I just saw an article that popped up this morning about how Neanderthals were found, or are believed to have been, in the southern Saudi Arabian desert some 50,000 years ago. They found some evidence for that. And I think it's, you know, they always discover something new and it changes their perspective a little about like how far. Like, I think Neanderthals were mostly in the European continent. Don't think as much in the Middle East, but of course, you know, people get around. And you have hundreds of thousands of years. I mean, things happen. People walk, they migrate. We can't even comprehend those time scales. That's why I think it's hard for us to understand, right? I mean, within one lifetime, somebody could probably walk around the whole planet if they were industrious enough. And then if you imagine that people had thousands of years to do this, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, a lot can happen in that time period, right? That is not recorded in the fossil evidence. I always found it interesting. We find fossil evidence, archaeological evidence, and we try to come up with stories based on such limited information about how people lived. And imagine just, it's a glimpse. It's only a glimpse into what there was. We'll never know exactly how they lived. No matter how much we collect, it's fragmentary, it's incomplete, partial knowledge, right? Not complete, not whole. We're never going to get a sense. Even if they were alive today, it's like watching animals and trying to surmise their behavior from their actions. And even that we can't satisfactorily do. So imagine just taking like a sliver, a slice, just finding some bones or tools spread apart by tens of thousands of years, and from that trying to reconstruct the history of man. Very, very challenging, very difficult, but I don't know that people properly understand the limitations of that knowledge. It's just so important to understand. It's fascinating to find these things, but then not to take it too far and think we understand what actually happened, because we don't. We don't have a clue. But it's so tempting to put small pieces together, come up with a convincing story, and then say, that story is true. When that story is not true. That story is just our idea. The story we tell ourselves that is nowhere near the reality or the truth of what has happened over the last millions of years. I mean, even in recorded history, right, where language has developed, we have such a limited understanding. Even within the past few decades or past centuries, like when you just think of like how we try to describe even what happened during, you know, the past 100 years, it's so limited. And how do you take 100 years worth of living and try to squish it down into like a story that fits into a history book? it has to cut so much out. It has to make generalizations. It has to assume, make theories, and history is just a story we tell ourselves to try and make sense of our past. But it is not the past. It's not real. You know, it's just not real. It's like a shade of the truth and reality. But it's interesting that we need that. You know, we need to have some story. We always have some story to explain how we got here. You know, why are we here now? It's like we so much don't focus on now unless it's embedded in some story that we tell ourselves. And history is that story. Even our own history. Think of how you would explain to somebody your life. You know, when you meet somebody and they start asking you simple questions like, oh, hi, you know, who are you and what do you do? Is often the question, right? What do you do? And that what you do defines who you are, which I think is also sort of sad because people make such quick generalizations. Like if you tell somebody what you do, then they immediately, oh, I know that person now. I know what kind of person they are from their occupation or from a few brief descriptions of your life. And what's your name? What's your occupation? Where do you live? You know, what's your family like? Are you married, not married, have kids, don't have kids? Like, when you think of the facts, you know, we always, when we talk to people, instead of seeing that person as a whole human being, we see them as a collection of a handful of facts. Their name, their ethnicity, their political affiliation, their religious affiliation, their educational background, their work history, their family makeup, geography, where they live, their history, you know, like, and we assemble those pieces together to come up with what we think is that image of that person and who they are, and then always come to some conclusion about all that. I mean, were they successful? Are they not successful? You know, all this stuff, right? I mean, just that we do. Everyone does it. I mean, instead of, you know, seeing a person without all that history and past as a human being that's alive right now, living, breathing creature of this planet, we're waiting to create that image of them so we can put them in a bucket, judge them, somebody, friend or foe, right? A lot of times that sort of information can lead to being a friend or foe. It's kind of interesting because I've been thinking a little bit about my past, my ancient past, you know, my childhood, things that happened to me when I was younger. And I remember I had this neighborhood friend that lived on my street that I used to play with, and when I was, I don't know, maybe 10 or younger, even younger probably. And then he moved away, and I was pretty sad when he moved away because he was sort of my only friend at that point in time. I was young and didn't get outside my neighborhood much. Was still in grade school, and he moved to Aurora, which is another city near where I live. And then I remember going to his house a few times, like we would during the summer. I didn't see him that much after he moved, but I would go to his house and stay over there. He lived sort of more in the countryside, and I remember I got hay fever when I went there. Like, I remember getting severe allergies. I think I got homesick. I remember when I stayed at his house, I was pretty young, not used to leaving, not used to staying at anyone's house, and I remember feeling homesick tremendously. Like, that was a problem, because I would stay there for several days, like stay at his house. Whereas before, we were just neighborhood friends, right? See each other during the day, maybe ride bikes together, get into whatever mischief around the neighborhood we could. And then it was like I was staying at his house like for 24/7 for, well, 24, maybe for like 3 days. So, and it got intense for me at that age. Like, I couldn't handle that, being away from home. I remember just the feeling of homesickness that I had. And, I lost touch with him, like, at that age, like, 40 some years ago or more. And then just recently, thought about it and tried looking him up. I can't really find him. I think maybe I found him. Thought I found his sister and reached out, and she didn't say anything, and he didn't respond to my request. Because it's probably odd, like 40 years later, reaching out and saying, hey, you used to live on my street, and, I used to play with your brother, and all kinds of things. And, I guess it's odd, but it's like I'm feeling more of, like, reflecting on my past and things that, were of some significance, and I remember playing with him and having a good time, and he was a pretty good childhood friend, and, wanting to just sort of reconnect. So I haven't reconnected yet, but it's just something that I'm even considering. I don't even know, after this many years, if it's worth reconnecting. Like, people change so much from when they're younger to when they're older, and then other parts don't change at all, right? When you think about yourself and who you were and who you are, there's a lot that similarities, but also change. We talked about change, how we all change. We all, because we are sort of just like a bundle of memories, right? As we accumulate more memories, we change. Who we are sort of changes. And after 40 years of accumulating more memories, we're all sort of different people than we were at that point in time. But we also can think back, remember that time, which is what I'm doing. Trying to reconnect with it somehow. Very nice. So yeah, just some things going on in my life. I've obviously been doing a lot of reflecting. A lot of that reflecting I do here while I'm walking, but it really has transitioned more to not reflecting on my life in particular, but on life in general, right? What is this living thing that we do? To examine one's life, not in the context of what is it I want, desire, need, which is what we do most of the time, focus on ourselves, and just sort of expand that reflection onto what is this entire thing called life that is not just me, but is everybody else. And it's a natural thing to do, I think, especially when you become older, to start expanding your awareness, right, beyond your little self, to others, to community, to the earth, to even beyond, right, the infinite cosmos that we are in. And not to see these things as ideas, but as realities. Truth, the reality and truth of who we are. We are this very small, in one way, right? If you measure yourself in one way, we can be this very small part of the universe. But then if you don't measure yourself, you can say you are the entire universe, right? Depending on how you look at it, which is why thought changes your perspective, and why thought is not a reliable perspective, because it does totally depend on how your basis, right? Thought always has a basis, whatever its basis of comparison is. It's always comparing small, large, smart, dumb, past, future, whatever. All these comparative things that we do, that we don't even think about, really. We just do it and don't reflect, and don't sort of sometimes go outside the bounds of thought, this superficial thought. When you think of how caught up we can be in sort of trivial matters, like things that are very small. versus, just opening yourself up to more than just your own petty little concerns. And not that your concerns are petty necessarily, but just when you see the immensity of everything that there is, everything gets put in its proper place, including your concerns, right? And that it's not just about you. It's not just about your individual life, your individual concerns, meeting your desires, which is how we spend most of our life, right? Pursuing whatever we find desirable. We have images in our head. I mean, which is, you think of how, like, this is how your life has been, right? Ever since you've been born, images put in your head about who you are, who you should be, what you should do. You should go to school, do well in school for the purpose of, going to college, for the purpose of getting a job, so you can, sort of be a machine and do what everyone else does, and, have a family, get married, have a family, get a house, work, and then die, And it's like, that's the life that you're led to believe is it's what you should do, right? And you can just mechanically follow along that path the way everyone has indicated you should go, or you can stop at some point and say, hold on a second, why? What are we doing this for? Why are we living this way? Is there another way to live? And I think few people have, challenged that notion, maybe more so these days out there in the world with more people. There's more people challenging, but it's not just to challenge that, right? Because you can just end up going down your own crazy path rather than someone else's crazy path, and it's essentially the same thing. I mean, your mind is the same as other people's minds, so you may say, I don't want to do what anyone else wants to tell me, I want to do what I want, right? Well, then you're still acting on your own individual desires. You may go off and do something different than what everyone else wanted you to do, but you're still in that cycle of desire and fear, like, until you break out of that cycle, right? Which is a lot of the reason we have these cycles, right? Is it gives us a sense of security that we don't otherwise have, to sort of have your life planned out. Do these things in life and you will be secure. And so many people, it's like they live in that way, seeking security. And they get the job they were supposed to get, they go to school and get the education they were supposed to get, and they get the job they were supposed to get, and they save the money they were supposed to save, and they did everything right, and they have a retirement, and they have a plan for their retirement, and they have, everything planned out. This is how you're going to live your life, and you can reach a certain age and then start going on cruises and, whatever it is you plan on doing in retirement, but still just living in your self-centered life, right? A life that focuses around you and your security, while all around you people could be suffering, other people not have that security. But as long as you're secure, your family, it's all that matters. Maybe not all that matters, and you try to convince yourself, maybe you give a little to charity, and you do some things that make you feel better about yourself, but it's not complete. Let's see what we got here. But it's just, you got to ask yourself, what's the point of it all? Why? Well, like, what is the point of that? Living a secure life, a very, maybe, as secure as it can be. And some people, I think they live their entire life that way, right? they have all their needs met. Maybe they never need anything. To some degree, they have security. Maybe they have enough money for food and all the things they need in life, right? But at the expense of what? At the expense of like becoming a machine, doing everything a certain way, never really questioning why they're doing it, never really stepping back a little, and asking bigger questions about the world and their place in it, and is this what they should be doing? Is this what life's all about? The purpose and meaning of life. And I think most people fill that space with traditional religions. They offer another story, right? Another story that people tell about themselves that, well, yes, I live this mechanical life, but if I do these other certain things, I will be, I will go somewhere happy when I die. Versus like, well, are you happy now? Are you happy in your current life, or you're just hoping for happiness when you die? Which is always, I think, a little depressing, because like if you don't find happiness while you're alive, but you have this expectation of somehow being happy one day in the future when you die, it's like you're looking forward to your death. Or maybe you should examine why it is that you're suffering now. And I think this is what so many people don't do. They just find it satisfactory to have some idea in their mind about Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Just to have a story that they're satisfied, that they think they know themselves. Somebody's given them a story to believe, and that story is fairly convincing, or convincing enough. They don't question it that much, though, because if they did, I think they'd find all the problems with it, right? That some people do. Some people that just ask questions about all that and go into it and say, I don't think things are exactly how we're led to believe. But even that provides a certain sort of, you could say, spiritual security, that your life is all buttoned up, wrapped up. You're living your life, you got a place to go when you die, something to look forward to. Maybe not the retirement home, or all the sickness that you face as you age, but like beyond all that, there's something better waiting for you. It's a way to get by. It's a way to get through all this living. But to what end? You sort of live a confused, miserable life, pacifying yourself with all these stories about who you should be and who you will be. But did you ever really live your life? What does it mean to live your life? To truly live, right? I don't know if anyone ever figures that out. Just steps back a while and, a bit from this monotonous, mechanical way of living, and say, what is life all about? Is this the best we can do? Is this society that we have now the pinnacle of our society? I don't think many people would agree with that. Maybe in certain places in the world, there's some more sense of security, but even then, don't you feel the pressure of the rest of the world, right? Can you really separate yourself from the rest of this world and say, as long as I'm okay in my little community, in my little country, in my place away from it all, it doesn't matter to me if the rest of the world's going to hell or not? I don't think that's a good way of living either, right? It's sort of like we're all in this together. I think, as I've said multiple times, if we don't see ourselves as the world, as the rest of the world, and we separate ourselves, then we're not seeing the truth of it all, that we are part of all of this, that all of us are part of the same humanity. and then just to care about your own personal self-centered desires and needs, is just, maybe that's not the way to be, right? And I think that when this awareness or intelligence of who we actually are, what this world is, and all of this comes with that comes this sense of just a larger presence, a larger being, of something larger than yourself, and trying to figure out what that is. And I think it's important that we go into it, not listen to what other people tell us it is, tell us the stories from thousands of years ago, and then expect us to just believe those stories outright, versus just being awake right now and saying, what is this life that I'm living? I mean, I am alive. Examine that life. What is that life actually? What is it? Who are you? Don't let anyone tell you that. Figure it out. You have awareness, you have senses, you have a brain that can think, and you have all this stuff. Why do you need anyone to tell you who you are? And just to stop and ask that question, but to ask that question, you have to give up all these other ideas of who you think you already are. Because if you don't, you just fall back to that. Maybe you just reinforce your bias. You just, yes, I've confirmed everything. I am who everyone said I am. And then you walk away satisfied. But you really haven't gone into it. And if that happens, you've superficially inquired, not deeply inquired. And there's a harm in that, because that harm can be, oh, I've been there, done that. I have gone into things. I have examined, and I've come to the conclusion that everything everyone said is right, or everyone that's in my small group is right. Everyone else is wrong. And this is the way I'm going to live. I mean, so many people, I think this is how they live from birth to death. And, it's not really questioned. It's not really gone into. And I think life is just so much richer when you challenge it, when you question it. We're facing such important challenges right now that I think we haven't faced in millions of years. We've gone through this explosion of civilization, and I don't think we've fully processed it, and what it means, and where we're headed, and the consequences of what we're doing to ourselves and to this planet, and just driven by ideas. That's our biggest problem. We have ideas of how this world should be, and we try to shape it according to those ideas instead of allowing it to be what it is. And it's such a destructive way to be, because our ideas are not truth, right? And our trying to force the world to fit our ideas or ideals, right? Ideals are the word idea and ideals, I mean, obviously are the same, right? Ideals are what comes from ideas. You have an idea how things should be, an idea of the perfect society, but then the person next to you has a completely different set of ideals. So who wins, right? Who wins in that circumstance? When you all have different ideals, you just end up fighting, right? Because the other guy says, well, my ideals are better than your ideals, and I'm not going to let you win. And my ideals bring about the perfect society, not yours. I mean, this is just what we're doing. Like, don't we see that this is why you can't just think your ideals, your ideas of how society should be are the right ideas, right? So somebody, I think, and I see so many people in our current political climate complain about, like, our current politicians, our current leaders, and think all we need to do is get rid of those politicians, those leaders, and everything will be fine. And I often have to point out to people, was everything fine before they were there? Was the world a happy place? Were people suffering before the current politician? Because I don't think people think that far, right? They see the immediate problem and think all we need to do is just get rid of this problem, this person, right? Get rid of this person and everything's going to be fine. But everything wasn't fine before. And it's like they forget that, right? Because they haven't gone into what is the root cause of all of this. Why we are where we are, or maybe they, you know, and it just leads to fighting, right? Because it's like, okay, well, now we need to, what do we need to do? We need to act, we need to be active. We need to join a cause. We need to fight. I often hear fight what's going on, right? Fight what's going on. And that's what we've done for thousands of years. If we don't break out of the fight the power, isn't that what we've always done? But everybody thinks that they're different. No, that's not, but it is. It's the same. To fight the power that is the same as we have always done. It is no different. But if you don't see that bigger picture, right? You don't see that. You just think, I have a purpose in my life, right? The purpose is to like become an activist and to work against whatever the current mainstream is. And then what we always forget, though, is once that person's gone, well, then the opposite side, if there is an opposite side, does the same dang thing. Now they feel empowered to work against whoever replaced that person with just as much fervor and energy, and it cycles back and forth like a pendulum, right? Every time one side wins, then the other side is just as adamant about overturning that other side, right? As long as we have sides, this is going to happen. As long as we don't see deeply enough to understand the root cause of all this, the root cause, not the superficial problem that you see. You see someone maybe making bad decisions and you just say, oh, all we need to do is just get rid of that person. But do you really know what to do? Do you really know the right way to live? You just want something different. But that different has already been there and didn't satisfy everybody. Didn't lead to peace, didn't lead to universal peace and everyone happy. No, we've been in conflict. I mean, my entire life, I've seen nothing but conflict in this world. From political, religious, just conflict, right? And at some point you just get sick of conflict, right? Not who's right, who's wrong, not picking a side, not I agree with this side, but not this side, but the whole conflict itself, not conflict about any particular thing. And you realize that as long as you take a side, as long as you pretend that there's a right side and a wrong side, and you join this organization because you believe it's right, you're contributing to that conflict. And until you see that, right, you don't change. You add to the conflict that's already there. So many people do this, right? And we have the left and the right in this country, right? The left and the right and the center, but mostly people focus themselves in one camp or the other. They like belonging. It makes them feel bigger than they are, right? To belong to something bigger, a bigger organization, a bigger belief, or like in this case, I always thought about why we tend to form groups like that. Why is there a left and a right? Why are there different political parties in this country? Why doesn't everyone just think on their own? Because it's easy to join a group and not think on your own, but just then become a member of that group, and you feel important. Like just the very act of joining that group, like overnight, you now feel bigger than you were. I belong to this bigger movement, this bigger thing. And now I'm important, and maybe I wasn't important before, and now I am, but now I have to accept that I'm on the red team, and I got to fight the blue team, or I'm on the blue team, and I have to fight the red team. You've now joined the battle. But isn't it more important to say, how do we end battling? How do we end the division? Not, how do I just exacerbate the division? How do I continue it? And I talk to people about this, and I just know that it's not being understood. Every time I try to say, our current president is a symptom of the problem, not the disease itself, right? Not the problem that, there may be many negative things that are occurring, right? And you could attribute it to that person. But when then all your goal simply is to remove that person, to take them out of the equation, one way or the other, right? Violent means, non-violent means, don't care, just want that person gone, right? Do you really understand what you're saying and what you're doing? Do you understand that all you are doing is propagating hate and violence, which thrives on that conflict, regardless of which side you pick? And you're the same. Your hate and violence are the same as the hate and violence of a person on the other side who thinks the same thing about your favorite politician, your favorite person. Don't, I mean, I know some fairly intelligent by human standard people who just, that's what they believe, right? They're stuck in that my side is right, your side is wrong mentality, rather than seeing that what's wrong is having sides. That until we break out of that, until we see that we're all on the same side, humanity, right? We're all part of this thing called humanity, and not separate, right? So the good and the bad and the things we like and the things we don't like are all part of who we are too. We are that mishmash of things we like and things we don't like, even within ourselves. We don't recognize that though. We don't look inside ourselves and say, gosh, do I have do I have hate? Do I have greed? Do I have desire? Are these things part of me, or am I above all that? You're not. You're not above all that. You have the same brain, like it or not, that the politician you hate the most has. You have the same brain. And you would like to think that's not true, but it is true. And we share the same common human brain, which all of us share the same deepest qualities, right? Of fear, looking for authority, for security, desire, pleasure, sorrow. These are common to all people, right? To all human beings. Until you see that, you still think you're a better human being than that other person. You're a different human being. I'm so different from that other person. How different are you? Even scientifically, right? How different is your DNA makeup from that other person? I don't think it's very different. I think it's very similar. And the only differences are very superficial, which are the conditioning that we've received. Each of us has received different conditioning depending on how we were, where we were born, who our parents were, were we rich or poor. We were influenced, right? We were influenced by different people. Had we, this human body, been in the same situation, same influencing, same conditioning as this other person, how different would you actually be? Because you are your conditioning. You were very much your conditioning, right? What you were exposed to, what you were taught from the moment you were born. And then some people say, well, yeah, that's the infinite debate of, genetics versus environment. Are you more a product of your genes, your genetic makeup, or your environment? And it's both, right? We are both. But the genetic structure, we're all very similar. Very slight differences, right? Definitely very slight differences. Fundamentally, very similar. But we want to think we're vastly different. We're vastly apart, right? So, when you take people from two sides of a political spectrum, right, very often they feel like they're completely different from those people until they sit down in a room and start talking. And you start talking to that person and you find out what they find important in their life. And, maybe they're focused on their religion, right? And you're not. So you think that's a huge barrier, a huge difference between you. But then you realize that person was. But why do they have that religion? Because they have fear. They grew up in a certain society, a certain culture group where that particular religion was what you did, what you believed in. So you had to go along with it. You had to become part of it. They were conditioned by that religious belief from a very young age. That's why they had those beliefs, right? Or whatever the case may be, or they grew up in a different economic zone. They didn't have a lot of money. They probably maybe suffered a lot by not having food, not having a place to live. And so that shaped them, right? How they lived shaped who they are. And to see that you are also shaped by that. All the experiences that you had growing up. I talked earlier about a friend I had when I was really young. Well, that conditioned me even. Having that friend and the experiences I had with that person is part of who I am. It's my memories, and I am my memories. So all these memories that I have are who I am, and the experiences and conditioning that I've had. And people have different experiences, different conditioning. You grow up in one country versus another, right? You take on the conditioning that culture has given you. Do you see that? Because that's the most important thing. If you see that you are your conditioning, right? Instead of that just being words. Oh, yeah, okay, whatever, I don't. See that is who you are. Had you grown up in a different culture, you would have different conditioning, different perspective on life. You would not believe the same things you believe now. You just wouldn't. And if you don't see that, you think, I know, my beliefs are the right beliefs. My conditioning is the right conditioning. Everyone else's is the wrong. And then you're not seeing the truth. You're not seeing that you are your conditioning. And that you are no different from your conditioning. And if you had different conditioning, you'd be a different person. You'd be just that person you hate, right? Or that person that you think you're so different from, only because they were born in a different country, different religious background, different economic background. That has determined who you are currently, right? You are your memories, you are your conditioning. And you may not see that, right? And if you don't see that, then you believe your conditioning is better than that other person's conditioning, and it's a reason to fight. It's a reason to hate, and it causes all the conflict that we have. Different conditioning causes different groups of people, all who think they're right, all who fight each other, thinking they're right, wanting their tradition to be the dominant conditioning, their whatever they believe, their culture to be the dominant culture, whether it's political, national, religious, or any other form of separation and division. Man, once you see that, once you see you are your conditioning, right, you lose the sense of importance with your conditioning. It just isn't the dominant thing anymore. Because up until that point, you just believe in this idea of yourself and who you are without saying, who am I actually? And am I my memories? Am I my conditioning? If that's true, then it's just my experience that has shaped me. I'm not a fundamentally different person. I am just the same person with different conditioning. And in that sense, we're all the same. Right? And we're all the same. And we should have sympathy for other people and compassion for other people, because we recognize that we are all the same person, not different people, with just different conditioning that leads to these superficial differences that we take to be so fundamental. Then we hate those people with different conditioning than us, because we don't understand who we are. That's why. That's it. You understand who you are and how you got to be who you are. Everything is different, right? You see things differently. You don't take that all so seriously anymore, right? My conditioning allows me to speak English, right? If I had grown up in France, I'd be speaking French right now, and maybe hating people that speak English. And maybe people that speak French have a disdain for people that speak English. I'm not saying that's true, but it could be true, right? I've heard many people say negative things. Many English-speaking people say negative things about French-speaking people, right? And vice versa. You hear all these examples I remember when I was young, people would say, oh, the French are always rude. If you go to, I went to France, I didn't find that to be true. I didn't actually find that to be true. I'm sure some people are rude there, just like some people are rude here. It's just how people frame things, right? And then the stories they tell, and then how you hear these stories, and then you build your prejudices and your impressions of people based on those limited stories that you hear. Someone comes back and says, French people are all rude, right? So then now you grow up with that sense in your head that that's true. But then you go and experience it on your own and find, I didn't find that to be true. That's my case. Everyone I met was friendly, right? Helpful, amazing. You know, France is an amazing place. And just, I didn't get that impression, right? So my experience was different. I suppose I could have encountered somebody that was rude, and if I hadn't done, then I would have confirmed, right? I would have had confirmation bias and said, oh yeah, that's true. That statement about true, and it just cements that prejudice in my mind, you know, that belief, that conditioning. It's just until you just have to step back and see that process is so flawed, that process is so dependent on circumstances and conditioning and limited, right? Your limited experience is why you have biases. You know, people have told you things about other people of different conditionings, different races and nationalities, and you just believe that. Maybe it was people you trusted, right? Your parents or community members or teachers told you things. You know, things about other people. Don't trust those other people. They're different than us, right? And always remember that, right? And if you just go along with that, don't have any problem with that, right? Then, yeah, you're just going to fit right into that pattern of prejudice. And so just, you know, we talk about this all the time, but it doesn't matter that we talk about. Do you see that you are the product of your conditioning? So we spent a lot of time here talking about this. But are you really understanding that? Like, or is it just a bunch of words? And you think, you know, this guy's just speaking nonsense, which I could be. But if you examine your own life, who you are now, how did you get where you are? Think of the conditioning that you've received in all the different forms, right? From the time you were born, where you probably can't even remember, but then you start having memories of how you were conditioned from your parents, your siblings, your environment, but you can't even remember every day, right? Just imagine how many innumerable days you've been exposed to beliefs and biases day after day after day, till you take that on. You become those beliefs and biases. That is a fact, you know? I'll state that as a fact. But until you examine it yourself and determine that that is a fact, that you are your conditioning, that you have been exposed to this conditioning your whole life, and that is who you are. You are not some ideal. You may think you're the pinnacle of humanity, right? That somehow you're better than everyone else, which I think is what we think, right? We think that. That's why we become self-centered, because we think we're the best thing that humanity's ever produced right here in this body, and we're gonna, you know, we're gonna embrace that. But then the problem is everyone does that. Well, how could I be the best thing humanity produces and this other person over here be the best thing humanity produces? How could we both be the best? Well, we can't. That's an idea that you have. It's not right. To think you're better than somebody else is not right. It's also an idea. The inequality, the comparison. See, this all comes down to comparing, you know, comparing two things and deciding, having an opinion, one way or the other, that this is better than that. Or I am better, or you may have the opposite opinion. You may say, I am worse than everyone else, which leads to depression, right? Which is, oh, I wish I was a better person. I see that I am not better. I see that that other person is better than me. It's the same problem, just reversed, right? And it's still self-centered, though, because you're still dwelling on yourself, worried about whether yourself is better or worse than somebody else, right? That's still self-centeredness, no matter which way that goes. And do we even see that? Or maybe we think by being self-deprecating, we're somehow being humble. We're somehow admitting that we're less than other people. And we see that as humility. It's not humility. That's just another form of self-centeredness. Sorry to break it to you. But when you think you're better or worse than somebody else, it's the same, because you're comparing. And that's why it's the same. Don't compare yourself to that other person, one way or the other. There's no better, there's no worse. And it's not even the same, because even to say you're the same is a comparison. You've compared and you've come to the conclusion, I am the same as everybody else. Right? That's another form of comparison. It's none of it. It's not, don't compare at all. Right? The comparison process ends. And not you end the comparison process, because if you end the comparison process, you are still there. You are still, you think you're doing something important by ending the comparison process. You see how hard it is to escape this ego that wants us to compare, wants us to think we're better, and even gives us things to do to make us feel that we don't have an ego anymore, when in fact it's the ego in disguise. When you do anything, it's an act of the ego, one way or the other. Any decision you make, any action you take from will, directed by your thought, whether it's I'm better, worse, or the same as anybody else, it doesn't matter, because it's a reaction to thought. And that's why it's the same. The ego is thought. The ego is all your memories. Any action that comes from your memories is an action of the ego, no matter what form it takes. Good, bad, whatever. Comparison, better, worse. And then when you see that it's just a big game that's being played, it's just the brain is doing all this all the time. Just seeing that process, right? Not changing it, not wanting to be better, not wanting to get rid of the ego, not want to get rid of this or say, oh, I wish I didn't do that. Don't wish you didn't do it. You do it. That's the reality. You do it. Just see that you do it. Don't wish that you didn't do it. What does wishing that you didn't do something do? It doesn't do anything. It's trying to deny that you are that. If you have hate and anger, observe that you have hate and anger, because that's the truth. To say, I wish I wasn't hateful, I wish I didn't have anger, is not true. Wish all you want. It doesn't change who you are. Right? They always say wish in one hand and shit in the other and see which one fills up first. I mean, it's a crude statement, but it's actually kind of very important, because on one side is reality. I mean, what we do every day that we may not want to admit we do in the morning when we wake up, and the other is wishing we were different than who we are, which is unreality. That's not true. Wishing we were? What does that mean? I wish I was different than who I am. What is that going to get you? Just conflict and angst by saying, well, I don't like who I am, I want to be different. And but then here's the problem. There's no, you don't change. You try to come then up with a plan for being different, a plan for changing who you are. And that plan comes from the same place that everything else comes from. Your memory, your ideal of who you think you are. We talked about ideal. It all comes from your ideas of perfection, your ideals, which could come from your own ideal of perfection or from someone else's ideal of perfection, from one religious tradition. You see the trap? We always end up in the same place when we talk about things, because it's where everything originates from. There's a source to all of this conflict, a source to everything wrong in your life. Single source, right? But we just don't ever go deep enough to see it. This is why, though, having conversations about things like this can be helpful, because when you end up, as we do very often, in the same place every time, why is that happening? Why do we always end up in a very similar place, no matter where we start? Because we're getting to the root of it. The root of all these problems is the same. Everything that's wrong. It's not different problems that all have to be solved. It's one problem. Seeing who you are. Seeing the reality of who you are clearly, that you are a product of your conditioning, that you are, the actions that you take day to day are most often, if not always, motivated by your thoughts. So your action is driven by thinking. And then your thinking is driven by your memory. Your memory is your conditioning. You know, everything you remember from the moment you were born to now, whatever was stored in your brain is your conditioning. That is the definition of conditioning. The structure of your brain, the physical structure of your brain that contains those memories, which change the physical structure of your brain, right? Memories are a physical change. Your brain had a particular structure before the memory was recorded, and now afterwards it has a different physical structure. And that's what allows you to remember. Something changed in your brain. You don't even need to know how or the mechanism of it, right? You just know that there is a storing of that memory. That experience that you had a few minutes ago, I remember walking down the trail that I just walked down, right? That's recorded now in my brain. It was not there before. Now it's there as a result of my experience this morning. Every day I'm adding more and more and more, right? More content, more conditioning to my brain. And instead of saying, well, how do I stop that? It's like, you don't stop that. That's what the brain does. The brain records. It's its job to record. What you have to stop is the illusion of thinking you are, well, you are that conditioning. It's not an illusion. But taking that to be truth rather than your own individual reality. To see, yes, your reality is your conditioning. Whatever you've been raised to believe, to do, is your current reality. But to say, is there a truth, though, that is greater than that reality? Is there a truth that is not dependent on my conditioning, that is not dependent on what I've seen and experienced? And that truth cannot come from memory. That truth cannot come from another person, from a book, from anything other than an awareness of your own being. Right? Being aware of who you are is the truth. You are those things. You are your conditioning, right? That is the truth. So just to see yourself as who you are, with not judging, not having an opinion about it, but just saying, yes, okay, I am those things. I am my conditioning. I see that memories are stored in my brain. I see that my thinking is a result of that. And not to talk about it in words, but to actually see it so fundamentally and so deeply that it becomes truth to you, not just words, not just me describing it. That doesn't help anyone. I mean, I could be right, I could be wrong. Any words I say, it doesn't matter anyways. Just to see, right, that you are, that's true. Go into that. You have eyes, so see. Right? You have ears, so hear. It's like, just use the senses that you have and your own cognizance to become aware of who you are for real. Right? Not this imaginary who you think you are. So yeah, I mean, and I think, coming to a place like this. So every morning I come, I walk. Now I end up talking a lot. I mean, I didn't used to. But I used to think, contemplate about all this stuff to a point, and then to another point, just stopped doing all that, because the thinking and the contemplating and the cognating is just adding sometimes to the trouble. It adds more conditioning. So like at some point you just stop that. It's like the seeing. Once you see who you are, it's like you lose the importance of even seeing who you are, because, or at least in this knowledge-based way, and you're just being in this present moment, right? Every day, being in that moment, whatever that moment is and brings, not what you think it is, what you should be. So just being out here in nature at this moment in time is living. It is life. It is the only life we have, right? This moment has meaning, not the memory of the moment, not the expectation of the next moment, but this particular moment. This moment has meaning. And I think that's what we have to see, right? It's not about saying life has no meaning or there is no meaning, no purpose, But so many people try to define that meaning in terms of some knowledge-based system, right? What's the meaning of my life? And then they try to seek that meaning out through some thought-based system. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. And one thought-based system is the same as another. Why do you need thought to give you meaning? The meaning is here in the moment. And it's not meaning that is derived from any thinking about what that meaning is. That is the meaning. The meaning is just being here right now is the meaning. No more, no less. I don't have to build up any ideas or any thoughts about, a heavenly existence or, what happens when I die, which it doesn't matter to me what happens when I die is whatever's going to happen. I don't have any control over it. So I'm not concerned about it. It's a process that occurs in nature, right? Just like everything occurs, it's just a process. And worrying about it or being concerned about it doesn't change it one bit. So instead of that, be aware of what's happening now in this moment, not what may come in the future, whether that's your death or your next meal or whatever. Just be here now and, pay attention. Because if you don't pay attention, that's the other problem, right? That's why, be here now is not the best way of saying it because, well, everyone is here and everyone is now, right? It's pay attention. And to know what it means to pay attention to being here now is maybe the more important thing. Because if you're distracted, we talked about this before, if you're distracted in this moment, then you're not really here. You're somewhere else. You're wherever your thoughts are taking you. If you want to be somewhere else, then your mind is taking you in some other direction. You're not here. And if you're thinking about what's going to happen later, you're not now. You're later. Or if you're thinking about something that happened to you yesterday or 10 years ago, well, now you're not here either. You're not now. Right? So it's like to be here now is not to have all those distracting thoughts or to be aware of the distracting thoughts because those are happening now. Right? So to not evade what's happening and say, oh, I'm thinking about the past. And he said not to think about the past. And that's not what I'm saying. If you're thinking about the past, think about the past. Just be aware that you're thinking of the past. And that awareness of the thinking is what's happening now. It's like if you catch yourself being distracted, if you're aware that you're being distracted, you are still here now. Your awareness of what's happening, regardless of whether it's you having a memory or you don't have to try to be anything different than who you are. Just be aware of who you are, distractions and all. Right? That is who you are, is that awareness that's it. It's not you have to be some different thing. So wherever you are, you can be aware, right? You don't have to be out here in nature to be aware. You can be sitting in an office and be aware of what you're doing when you're in the office. You can be in a busy city and aware of what you're doing in that busy city. Just if you're aware of whatever you're doing. I mean, some people call this mindfulness, right? The Buddhists like to call this mindfulness. And I remember when I was studying Buddhism, there was so much talk of mindfulness, especially Thich Nhat Hanh. I mean, he's written a number of books on this. And I don't want to recommend that you read books. I mean, but if you want to read a book, go read a book. Read a book by Thich Nhat Hanh or Ajahn Chah or Ajahn Brahm or whoever. I mean, do what you want, right? I mean, I'm not telling anyone what to do. But just when you do that, just be aware of what you're doing. If you're reading a book, be aware that you're reading a book. And why you're reading the book. Why are you reading a book? What are you hoping to gain from that? Right? Ask those questions, though. Be aware of your motivation for doing everything that you're doing. Why are you doing that? What's the origin of that motivation? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from a thought? Is it coming from a fear? Is fear motivating you? Is desire motivating you? Is sorrow motivating you? Why are you doing the things you're doing, right? And then just being aware and examining those motivations can lead to more insight about yourself and what motivates yourself, right? And just that awareness alone, whether you're reading a book or not reading a book or listening to music or not listening to music, just be aware of the mind during all these circumstances, right? And like I said, some people call that mindfulness. But why do we have to call it anything? That's just a word that if you try to understand from that word what it means to be aware, or, okay, I don't understand. And I did this too. I remember when I first started studying Buddhism and everyone's talking about mindfulness. I'm like, what is this thing called mindfulness? I need a definition. I need to know what it is so I can do it. I was in that state, where I was like, this sounds great. So there's books on mindfulness and I'm going to read them, and I did. And I remember when I started trying to find the definition, what is mindfulness? I don't understand. Is it just being aware? Is it different from being aware? And so you see, just doing that, you enter into this thought process, which takes you away from the very mindfulness, which is why let's not give it a name. Let's not worry about that. Let's not try to define it. Let's not come up with practices for it. Let's not say what it is. And this is where, it doesn't matter. I say be aware, pay attention. And if you don't know what I mean by be aware or pay attention, then it has no meaning. So it doesn't matter what I mean by be aware and pay attention. What do you mean by being aware and paying attention? What do you think paying attention is? Figure it out on your own. See that you can be sitting on a bench and looking at things, right? I mean, start with your senses. Because I think your senses are something we can all relate to and say, I'm receiving all this information from my ears, from my eyes, from my skin, through touch, through my smell, I can smell things, I can taste things, maybe not at the moment. I'm not tasting much, but there's still taste, it's still there. And also I can see my mind, the thoughts I'm having. What's running through my mind that isn't related to me, right? I may be thinking about the work I have to do later, which I occasionally am. It pops into my head, I can't deny it. It's what I have to do today. So I think about my work, but then I return to that beautiful flower in front of me. Now I see that flower. But I see how my mind does that, how it jumps around from a thought, a memory, a projection of the future, something of the past. Maybe I'll think about that friend I knew when I was growing up, or, I had a cup of coffee this morning with some chocolate syrup, homemade chocolate syrup that I made from cacao powder and oat milk, a little bit of sugar, which was very good, which has probably charged up my brain and, helped me speak today. And, so there's all kinds of things I could be thinking about. I can't think of everything, right? So there's things I'm not thinking about. Thinking is very limited, right? When you think about one thing, you're not thinking about something else. And that's also how, when you're thinking about the past, you're not aware then. It's a block. It's a hindrance to you being aware of what's happening now when you're in that mode. So this is another reason why, if you see yourself being distracted by these thoughts, and that is taking you away from being aware of what's happening now, just that seeing may bring about an action that says, maybe those thoughts will die down, maybe they won't, right? But if you're aware of the fact that, the thinking is distracting you, the thinking is a hindrance, okay, well, think or don't think. No one's telling you to do one or the other. Do what you want, but just be aware that if you're thinking, be aware that you're thinking. If you're walking, be aware that you're walking. If you're looking at a flower, be aware that you're looking at the flower. But also, are you really looking at the flower? Because most people are not really looking at the flower. They're superficially, I see something white, right? And it's a flower, but I'm not really looking at that flower. I'm only seeing the color. There's much more to that flower. If you look into that flower, right? And all of its structure and nature and the fact that it's beautiful that flower is there. How did that flower even get there? And again, I'm not thinking about it, right? I'm not, because that's all thinking. But just being fully aware of that flower as it is right now in front of you, in its full glory, what it is. You don't need to add to it. You don't need to add glory even to it, right? Just see it for what it is. You don't need to add adjectives. You don't need to describe it in any detail. You don't need to get emotional about it. You don't need, because that's all added on to the actual seeing of the flower. Do you really see that flower? Right? It's a good question to go into. Do you really see anything? Or do you just see the words? So do I really see that flower, or do I just see the word or the image of the flower in my head? Most of the time we're just looking at the image in our head. We've decided that's a white flower and that's the end of it. No reason to look at it any longer. I've come to a conclusion. This is like coming to a conclusion is often not the right thing to do, because it stops the process of inquiry, of you actually seeing what's in front of you for what it is. You've concluded what it is, and now you move away from it to something else. Your attention is, you've been distracted by that other thing over there, whatever it is, and your attention's no longer on that flower. So, I mean, we can talk all day, right, about all this, and it really doesn't change a thing. So, maybe let's say that's enough talking, right? Hopefully, I'm talking, but like at the same time, I can hear all the cicadas. There's a hummingbird actually over there that I'm seeing now that I didn't see before. I'm sure it's not coming out in the video, but it's jumping around from flower to flower. So yeah, I mean, maybe we shouldn't be doing so much talking. I've said this before, kind of exacerbating the situation. Probably should just be sitting here listening to the cicadas, the crickets, the frogs, which I just heard one, whatever else is going on, all the sounds, and I see some bees down on the grass. I mean, I could sit here and describe it forever, right? But that description is not me being here. And really, even just by making these videos, it takes me away from being here. And I know that, and I'm aware of that, right? I'm aware of that, and that's part of my awareness. It's just what I'm doing right now, right? It's not good, bad, whatever. I'm recording and talking, recording my talking, and that's what this is, right? It's not entertainment. It's not, there's no purpose to it. It is just me recording what I'm seeing and saying in this moment. So maybe it's about time to wrap this up. I think we've I've talked enough, right? It might be time to just be silent and take the rest of this in before I get back and start my work day, which is going to have to happen pretty soon. So, okay, well, it's been a little while, and I guess it's been about an hour and a half. That time has flown by for me. Maybe I'll just continue walking a little here, and then I'll shut this off. Maybe I'll stay quiet again for a few minutes. I mean, it is good to be quiet. The one thing I'm doing is not being quiet, and there's a truth in that as well, right? Instead of rattling on all the time about this and about that, can we just be in a place like this and be quiet? Because we can't pay attention when we're talking. Like, you can't. So the very thing I'm saying, is to pay attention, is I'm not doing at the moment, because I'm talking about paying attention. So let's just pay attention for a while. I'll stop the talking. But I'll keep the video rolling.